King Charles's health has genuinely improved this year. That's not spin, it's confirmed by multiple sources and consistent with everything the palace has said publicly. But that improvement hasn't happened in a quiet, uneventful year. If anything, it's happened during one of the busiest, most personally demanding periods of his entire reign. At the exact same time Charles has been managing his own cancer treatment, he's also been navigating one of the more complicated family stretches of his reign. A confirmed, significant reunion with his estranged son, real reported tension with his heir over how that reunion has played out, and an unresolved, ongoing scandal involving his brother. Managing a serious illness is hard enough on its own. Doing it while also holding together a genuinely strained family is a different kind of test entirely. So let's go through exactly what's confirmed on both fronts, health and family, and how they've been unfolding side by side. If you want more of this kind of grounded, fact-checked coverage, consider subscribing. Let's get into it. Let's start with the health situation, since it's the foundation everything else sits on top of. Charles was diagnosed with an undisclosed form of cancer in February 2024, discovered incidentally during treatment for a separate, benign enlarged prostate condition. He briefly paused public engagements when treatment began, continuing to work through state papers and official correspondence throughout, before resuming a fuller public schedule. He was briefly hospitalized in March 2024 for observation related to treatment side effects. An episode a palace aide later described as a minor bump in the road. The real turning point came in December 2025. In a taped message for Channel 4's Stand Up to Cancer, Charles announced that his treatment schedule would be reduced going into 2026, describing the development as both a personal blessing and a testament to advances in modern cancer care. The palace has since described his condition as having moved into what's been called a precautionary phase, with reduced but ongoing treatment and continued monitoring. Importantly, and this bears repeating because it gets lost in a lot of coverage, the palace has never used the word remission, and Charles has never disclosed the specific type of cancer he has. Reduced treatment is genuinely good news, but it isn't the same thing as being cured, and the palace has been consistently careful never to blur that distinction. There's a useful comparison worth drawing here to how the palace announced Queen Elizabeth's own health decline in her final years. Since it shows this cautious, incremental disclosure approach isn't new to Charles specifically, it reflects a longer institutional habit. Elizabeth's later public statements referenced only vague mobility issues for well over a year before her death, without ever specifying an underlying condition, a level of vagueness that drew some public criticism at the time, but that the family maintained regardless. Charles's own approach, sharing a clear diagnosis timeline and treatment trajectory while withholding only the specific cancer type, actually represents considerably more transparency than that earlier precedent, even though it can still feel frustratingly incomplete to anyone following closely and hoping for a fuller clinical picture. That gradual, comparative openness is arguably one of the more meaningful shifts this reign has introduced, even if it rarely gets framed that way in day-to-day coverage, since it's easy to take for granted just how much has actually been shared compared to previous royal generations, especially given how private the monarchy has traditionally been about matters of personal health. Since that December update, the reporting has been consistently positive. According to royal expert Emily Andrews, writing for Woman and Home and citing palace insiders, Charles has been on genuinely good form this year, with his public engagements running pretty close to his pre-diagnosis levels. She reported that courtiers have kept Fridays clear for him to rest, a practice in place since his treatment began in February 2024, and that his doctors, while he's still believed to be receiving a form of immunotherapy, are described as very pleased with his progress. He's kept up a demanding schedule of state visits, hospital visits, and military ceremonial duties throughout the year, though he's made small concessions, choosing a carriage rather than horseback at Trooping the Color for the second year running. A subtle but telling signal of an ongoing, gradual recovery rather than a full return to his pre-diagnosis physical routine. It's worth noting how much of this positive trajectory has come through steady, incremental updates rather than any single comprehensive announcement, a pattern that's actually been consistent since the very beginning of his diagnosis. Shortly after going public in 2024, Charles described losing his sense of taste as a treatment side effect, declining to say whether it was temporary. Around the same period, he described the diagnosis itself, in his own words, as daunting and at times frightening, one of his more candid public reflections on the emotional toll of the experience. By 2025, aides were describing him as managing his condition, while trying to live as close to a normal life as possible, framing his approach as fundamentally about duty, someone who simply gets on with things because that's what he's driven by. Taken together, this string of small, honest updates has built a far more detailed picture of his health journey over 2.5 years than any single disclosure could have, even without ever naming the specific cancer involved. It's worth mentioning Kate's parallel journey here too, since the two situations unfolded almost simultaneously, and give useful context for how the family has handled illness generally this stretch. Kate announced her own cancer diagnosis in March 2024, just a month after Charles's underwent roughly 6 months of preventive chemotherapy, and confirmed in January 2026 that she was in remission. That's two senior working royals managing serious health diagnoses within a month of each other, both showing genuine positive progress roughly 2 years later, which says something real about how heavy this particular stretch has actually been for the family behind the scenes, even with all the positive updates. Now, let's get into the family pressure that's been unfolding at the same time, starting with the biggest and most recent development: Harry and Meghan's confirmed move back to the UK. This is a story we've covered in full detail before, so we'll move through the core facts quickly here and focus more on how it connects to the health situation specifically. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Harry, Meghan, and their children, Archie and Lilibet, are relocating to Britain for an extended period, while keeping their homes in Montecito and Portugal. This followed a private family reunion at Highgrove on July 10th, where Charles saw his grandchildren in person for the first time in 4 years, since before Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations in 2022. According to CNN and The Guardian, Charles was informed of the relocation decision on Sunday, August 16th, and responded warmly, welcoming the opportunity to see more of his family in a personal capacity. Quick break. If you're finding this kind of grounded, fact-checked royal coverage useful, drop a comment letting me know which specific thread, the health situation, the Harry reunion, or the Andrew fallout you'd like a deeper dedicated video on, and I'll prioritize it based on what gets the most requests. There's a genuinely warm, human detail worth including here too. During a New York City gala on July the 16th, just days after that Highgrove visit, Harry gave reporters a brief, informal update on his father's condition, telling attendees his father was doing great. He separately mentioned that Meghan and the children were happy to be back in California after the UK trip, describing Archie and Lilibet as growing like weeds. That's a small human moment that captures something real. A family cautiously easing back into contact after years of distance, with Harry himself offering a personal, positive account of his father's health rather than anything guarded or formal. That kind of casual, unscripted health update from Harry is actually worth pausing on, because it's a genuinely different register than almost anything the palace itself has released. Official statements about Charles's condition tend to be carefully worded, run past aides and medical advisors, and calibrated to avoid saying anything that could be overinterpreted. A brief, offhand comment at a gala, by contrast, has none of that institutional filtering. It's just Harry, informally, telling a room full of people that his dad is doing great. Whether or not that phrase captures the full clinical picture, and it almost certainly doesn't, it carries a kind of emotional weight that a formal palace statement never quite manages. A son speaking plainly and positively about a father he'd only recently been reunited with after years of distance. Here's where the story gets more complicated, though. While Charles's reaction to the relocation has been consistently warm, reports suggest William and Kate were considerably less enthusiastic, with some outlets describing them as blindsided by the decision. Neither William nor Kate has made any public comment on the move, a silence CNN has specifically noted. Royal commentator Kinsey Schofield told Page 6 back in July that William has no plans to reconcile with his brother, and the two remain estranged, with their last confirmed appearance together dating back to their uncle Robert Fellows's funeral in August 2024. Given everything we've covered about how much of the day-to-day institutional workload William has taken on while his father manages his health, a certain amount of frustration at having his estranged brother relocate nearby, seemingly without much advance coordination specifically with him, is at least understandable, even if the more dramatic tabloid characterizations of that frustration deserve real skepticism. That puts Charles in a genuinely difficult position, managing his own health while also navigating a family dynamic where his personal reconciliation with one son appears to be creating real tension with the other. It's worth being fair to Charles here. Reports consistently describe him as prioritizing personal relationships more deliberately since his diagnosis, a completely understandable shift for anyone who's confronted a serious illness. But that same shift, prioritizing time with Harry and his grandchildren, appears to be landing awkwardly with William, who's had to absorb more institutional responsibility during the same period without necessarily sharing his father's enthusiasm for the pace of reconciliation. It's worth thinking about the psychological logic behind Charles's apparent shift in priorities, because it's a genuinely common pattern among people who've faced serious illness, not just royals. A cancer diagnosis has a well-documented way of reordering what feels urgent versus what can wait. Institutional caution, protecting the monarchy's image, managing internal family politics carefully, avoiding anything that could look like favoritism, is exactly the kind of long-term, abstract consideration that tends to feel less pressing once someone is confronting their own mortality in a concrete, immediate way. Time with grandchildren he'd gone years without seeing, by contrast, becomes the kind of thing that can't simply be deferred to some more convenient future moment, because that convenient moment isn't guaranteed. That doesn't make William's frustration any less valid from his own position. Having to manage the institutional consequences of decisions he didn't make is a real, legitimate burden. But it does help explain why Charles appears willing to accept some family friction as a reasonable cost for the personal reconciliation he's pursuing with Harry. Layered on top of both the health situation and the Harry-William dynamic is the still unresolved Andrew situation, which we've covered extensively before, but is worth summarizing again here because it remains an active, ongoing source of pressure. Charles formally stripped Andrew of his remaining style, titles, and honors earlier this year, following renewed scrutiny of his Epstein associations. And Andrew, now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, was evicted from Royal Lodge and relocated to a smaller property on the Sandringham estate. There's continued scrutiny tied to an active investigation into his past conduct, and just recently, Andrew turned down a private olive branch invitation from Charles to spend time at Balmoral, according to reporting we covered in an earlier video. That's a genuinely unresolved, ongoing family rupture running in parallel with everything else, one that requires Charles to maintain a much firmer, more public line than the careful private warmth he's extended toward Harry. The contrast between how Charles has handled Andrew versus how he's handled Harry is genuinely instructive about how he's prioritizing these various pressures. With Andrew, the response has been public, formal, and largely irreversible. Stripped titles, forced relocation, a firm public distance maintained even while extending some private concern for his well-being. With Harry, everything has moved in the opposite direction: private, gradual, reversible if it doesn't work out. That's not inconsistency. It reflects two genuinely different kinds of risk. Andrew's situation involves serious allegations tied to a convicted sex offender, something that threatens the institution's core credibility if handled with any ambiguity. Harry's situation, whatever the history of public criticism, is fundamentally a family relationship, one that can be rebuilt or allowed to stall without threatening the monarchy's institutional standing either way. Charles appears to be applying exactly the level of caution each situation actually calls for, even while dealing with both of them, and his own health at the same time. So how has Charles actually been managing all of this simultaneously? The honest answer, based on everything reported, is that he's been remarkably consistent in his approach, continuing to work through his treatment without dramatically scaling back his public role, extending genuine warmth toward Harry's side of the family while drawing a clear line that it doesn't change their non-working royal status, maintaining a firm, public separation from Andrew while still showing some private concern for his brother's well-being, and by most accounts, simply continuing to show up day after day for the demanding schedule of a working monarch, even while doing all of that. That consistency is honestly one of the more notable, if under-discussed, aspects of this entire stretch of his reign. Managing a serious health condition is difficult enough in isolation. Managing it, while also serving as the emotional and institutional center of a family, working through two separate, significant ruptures at the same time, one warming, one still frozen, requires a kind of sustained personal resilience that doesn't always get the credit it deserves in coverage, that tends to focus on one storyline at a time rather than the fact that all of these pressures are landing on one person simultaneously. So, what happens next? Watch for any further health updates, particularly around whether his treatment schedule continues to ease or hold steady heading into autumn. Watch for whether William and Kate ever comment publicly on the Harry situation, or whether their continued silence persists as Harry and Meghan actually settle into life in the UK. And watch for any movement on the Andrew investigation, since that remains the most legally serious and least resolved of the three major threads running through this family's year. None of these are fully resolved, and it's genuinely possible none of them will be for some time. But they're the concrete threads worth following rather than speculation dressed up as certainty. That's the real, full picture as of August 25th, 2026. A king managing a genuine, positive health recovery while simultaneously holding together a family, navigating reconciliation on one side and continued rupture on the other, all while maintaining a public schedule most people half his age and in full health would find demanding. It's a version of this story that's easy to miss if you only follow one thread at a time. The health updates in one video, the Harry reunion in another, the Andrew fallout in a third. Looked at together, though, it's a genuinely remarkable picture of endurance. A monarch managing his own mortality in full public view, while also functioning as the one figure trying to hold together a family, pulling in several different directions at once. Whatever comes next on any of these fronts, that underlying pattern, health managed quietly and steadily, family relationships navigated with careful, individualized judgment rather than a single uniform approach, seems likely to continue defining how Charles handles this stretch of his reign. If there's a significant update on any of these fronts, a formal health statement, a comment from William, movement on the Andrew investigation, I'll be covering it here, so Make sure you're subscribed for that. And if you missed our earlier breakdown of exactly how the Harry and Meghan relocation came together, or the full story of Andrew's fall from royal life, I've covered both in detail in other videos. You can check them out by clicking right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.